Nain, pneumonia, pneumatic, pneumena. Are you beginning to see the connection between breath and spirit? When I was a teenager, my Uncle Jack Porter came to visit one time and he asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I said, well, I'll probably do engineering, but what I'm really interested in is studying the noumena. Well, he asked, do you know what the word noumena means? And I said, I don't remember my exact words, but I said something like, sure. It means the underlying foundation that's underlying all of the phenomena that we see, all of the material that we touch and hear and so on. It's not a bad definition, really. I'm not sure where I got that definition, but it probably was from Immanuel Kant, the 18th century philosopher. I was always interested in philosophy, and I was starting to read the World Book Encyclopedia that my mother had just started selling in those years, and I probably saw that definition somewhere in the encyclopedia. Kant uses the word noumena to refer to the absolute reality that gives rise to all non-absolute relative phenomena, sight, sound, smells, and so on. We call them relative because they're based on relativities, bright versus dim, loud versus soft, hot versus cold, and so on. And according to Kant and the Eastern sages, all these relative phenomena owe their existence to the underlying absolute. Call it spirit, or noumena, or whatever name you choose. So for a very long time, not only Eastern culture but also Western culture has seen the connection between breath and the underlying spirit that produces our universe. Thousands of years ago, the seers of India made a science based upon this intimate connection between breath and spirit. Utilizing these ancient yogic techniques, in 1837 Sadhu Haridas, a Muslim, and I quote, was interred in the presence of the Maharaja, his whole court, and a number of French and English doctors. He was placed inside of a large wooden case, which was strongly riveted, closed, and sealed with the Maharaja's own seal. The case was then lowered into a specially constructed brick vault. Earth was piled upon the case, and a detachment of the Maharaja's guard was placed to keep watch over the vault. 4 sentries mounted guard over it by day, and 8 by night. 40 days later, Haridas was disinterred in the presence of the Maharaja, his court, and the French and English doctors who had previously been present at his interment. In a short time, he had recovered. The British ruled India at the time, and Claude Wade, who wrote that account, was the British resident in the Maharaja's court. According to him, the fakir talked with myself and those about him freely, though feebly. Then we left him, convinced that there had been no fraud or collusion in the exhibition that we had witnessed. It is this intimate connection between breath and spirit that has tapped the power Kriya Yoga. According to Yoganandji, the ancient yogi Patanjali extols Kriya Yoga by his promise that liberation can be attained by that pranayama, which is accomplished by disjoining the course of inspiration and expiration. Inspiration here means breathing in, and expiration means breathing out. In short, breath is a cord that binds the soul to the body, and it must be broken in order to redirect consciousness away from relativities of the body sensations and toward the absolute, God. Santa Teresa never heard about Kriya Yoga. In her time, the world wasn't ready yet for this technique, but she obviously recognized the connection between breath and meditation as suggested in the above quote. Later in the book, she expands upon this thought.
For when he means to enrapture the soul, it loses its power of breathing, with the result that although its other senses sometimes remain active a little longer, it cannot possibly speak. At other times it loses all its power at once, and the hands and the body grow so cold that the body seems no longer to have a soul.
In other words, if one meditates deeply, not only does the breath cease, but even the heart and other organs slow down or even stop. Thus, when St. Paul says, I die daily, he was speaking the literal truth, for until the recent introduction of electronic instruments that can detect the absence of brain activity, the cessation of breath and heartbeat was a clinical definition of death. So, like the Muslim Haridas, when St. Paul says, I die daily, He is reporting what he has actually experienced in deep meditation. Haridas didn't need to breathe. He was able to endure for 40 days in that small box because his body had stopped. This death, Santa Teresa says,
is a delectable death, a snatching of the soul from all the activities which it can perform while it is in the body, a death full of delight.
Is she merely paraphrasing scripture here? Obviously not. She too, like St. Paul, is reporting her own experience. The body slows down and stops of its own, without any need to forcibly hold one's breath. As Yoganandji says in his interpretation of the Rubaiyat, written by the Muslim Sufi Omar Khayyam, when a man is reading a book with deep concentration, fails to hear a sound, he is not said to be unconscious. He is so engrossed in a book that he is outwardly oblivious to all sensations. Likewise, the adept can so inwardly merge himself in the joyous conduct of divine consciousness that he is not cognizant of his bodily sensations or outward surroundings. In ecstasy, when the body is in a death-like or deep sleep-like state, the inwardly tuned body consciousness is able to receive perceptions of divine love from the pure consciousness of the soul. And how enjoyable is this rapture? She says,
The better he gets to know the greatness of God, the better he comes to realize the misery of his own condition. Having now tasted the consolations of God, he sees that earthly things are mere refuse.
little wonder that Mother Teresa of India bemoaned her torment. Santa Teresa continues,
So little by little he withdraws from earthly things, and in this way becomes more and more his own master.
like Paramahansa Yogananda, Santa Teresa here defines the word master to mean one who has mastered herself by withdrawing her consciousness from earthly things. And the joy that results from this mastery is far greater than any derived from sensuous experience. Neither sex, nor human love, nor wealth, nor drugs can compete with the experience of knowing God. As Yoganandaji says, neither human love nor the temporary oblivion of intoxication by wine can permanently ease sorrow and yield lasting happiness. The attainment of unending, unalloyed joy is possible only by communing in deepest meditation with the Supreme Beloved of the universe. A couple of pages later in that book he adds, there is no greater happiness than divine joy, which is ever new. Santa Teresa also warns that not only should one not forcibly hold one's breath in order to reach the state of communion, but neither should one torture the body in other ways.
There is one peril of which I want to warn you. I have seen persons given to prayer fall into it, and especially women. It is this: some women, because of prayers, vigils, and severe penances, have poor health. As soon as they feel any interior joy that comes over them, a physical weakness and languor, and they fall into a sleep, which they call spiritual. So they get into their heads that it is arrobamiento, or rapture, but I call it abobamiento, foolishness, for they are doing nothing but wasting their time at it and ruining their health.
She was writing in the 1500s during the Dark Ages. At that time, the world was not ready for techniques that would accelerate spiritual growth. Not surprisingly, a number of practices were developed that were harmful, just as physicians of the time harmed the body by attaching leeches to suck out the blood. Not surprisingly, if you go to some of the museums of the old churches in Europe, you'll find a variety of instruments of torture, such as whips, steel balls studded with spikes attached to chains, hair shirts, and the like. These instruments were to be used on oneself to mortify the flesh. The theory was that if the body could be sufficiently mortified, then the consciousness could more easily detach from the body and enter the soul. It is this dangerous practice that Santa Teresa is warning against. In addition to the bad habit of practicing sleepitation, when one is intending to practice meditation, in the fifth mansions we read,
Oh, sisters, how can I ever be able to tell you of the riches and treasures and the delights which are to be found in the fifth mansions? I think it would be better if I were to say nothing of the mansions I have not yet treated, for no one can describe them. The understanding is unable to comprehend them, and no comparisons will avail to explain them, for earthly things are quite insufficient for this purpose.
Yoganandji says, the love between soul and spirit is the perfect love, the love that you are all seeking. When you meditate, love grows. Millions of thrills pass through your heart. If you meditate deeply, a love will come over you such as no human tongue can describe. Elsewhere he says, if you could feel even a particle of that divine love, so great would be your joy, so overpowering, you could not contain it. Many years ago, I heard a talk by one of our senior monks, Brother Anandamoy, and in that talk he was describing how one day when he was working with Guruji, when he first became a monk, many, many years ago, something upset him and he thought to himself, he doesn't even really care about us, he's just toying with us. And he said that instantly there came over him such an intense love that if it would have been any greater, he felt that he would have died. Well, when I heard that, the skeptic jumped up in me and I thought, hype. Surely it couldn't have been that intense. But then some years later, I had a similar experience myself. I had heard Guruji speak to me twice in as many days, and otherwise he seemed to be pushing me to do something that just seemed like the height of foolishness. I thought, well, this can't be right. Doesn't make a bit of sense. It was so bizarre that I thought maybe it was even the devil that was talking to me. So I pulled out one of my favorite photographs of Yoganandji, and I looked at it in order to tune in with him. And after I felt a little bit of his vibration, I said, is it you who is talking to me? And almost like Brother Anandamoy, almost instantly I felt such a surge of energy going to me. It was just such a love that I had never experienced before in my life. And I felt I just had to discharge that energy somehow. So I began to run up and down the stairs. We were over in our place in Oceanside at that time. And it had 3 floors, and I was running up and down the stairs, up and down, up and down. And here I am, I'm like in my 60s somewhere, not a young man. I didn't get out of breath at all. Felt like I weighed maybe 5 or 10 pounds. I wasn't levitating, but it seemed like I must have come close because I went up and down those stairs who knows how many times before finally I felt like I didn't have to run up and down the stairs to dissipate that energy. Such love. It was just truly an unspeakable experience. So that's the kind of love that Guruji is talking about, and that's the kind of love that the saints can feel all the time after they've meditated for many years, after they have purified their consciousness, so that they are able to work in the world but not be distracted by the sensations of the world and keep their mind focused on God. Well, they say that one way that you can know that God is actually speaking to you, if you hear the voice in your own language, if you hear the words, and if you follow through with those words, and things go well, well, then that's proof that it was God that was speaking to you. If things don't go well, well, then you have to question whether or not it was really the voice of God. In that case, I did indeed follow through with what I thought were Guruji's intentions, and it all blew up in my face just as I had anticipated that it would, or any sensible person would foresee. And for the first time since I got into SRF, I was really angry with Yoganandji. I just couldn't shake off the feeling that he had led me out to the end of a branch and then cut it off. And it hurt. There were a lot of painful experiences associated with that episode. But of course, the Guru's only desire for his follower is a follower's own happiness. And sure enough, after about 3 months, I began to see that my life was just so much better. It was just happier in the first place. One of the major changes that had taken place was the fact that I was no longer in love with a girl that I had been in love with for over 30 years. It was a girl that I'd met before I met my wife.